Okay, everyone, we are ready to talk about a very important and pressing issue that I think affects every woman at some point during her peri and postmenopause journey, and that's mental health. So I invited Jane Savage to come and talk with us today, and she is a registered social worker, and she's been specializing in counseling women in perimenopause, which I think is really important. I've heard from several members over the course of the last few years that they go and they finally find a counselor, but then they don't really know anything about
Mhm.
how the hormones can change things. And like recently, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who's going through a rigmarole with her medications where her antidepressants have just stopped working. They're just not working anymore, and they're trying to find something else that works. And so I said, well, maybe there's something to look into with the hormones because that could potentially be a problem. The hormones really can affect our mental health. So very important conversation. I think a lot of the times people end up just feeling really discouraged when this comes up and confused about what happens. So, what can you tell us about your presentation today? What are we talking about? What are you going to share?
Yeah. So my hope today is just to cover as much ground as we can. Just because what you say, Jessica, is that like it's such a confusing, isolating, lonely transition, and no one's talking about it. I think a lot of clients that I work with say like there's still this feeling of like isolation. No one, when they reach out to say their family doctor, for
Hmm.
example, they feel like they're undermined. They're made to feel like, why are you questioning this? Or they're given some recommendations, like typical, like doing some blood work and then some options, but that general practitioner doesn't have specialization and the same experience. My hope today is to just give women a really good sense of like normalization. I have a very holistic approach, but I'm very much focused on helping women that I work with to make sure that they feel like they're not the only one going through this. It's a very collective experience, and to really help them feel like they're not alone. This is very normal, and to make them feel a bit more empowered with the knowledge that we share and that exchange and that connection in sessions. In today's presentation, I really want to focus on that, but also give women some step by steps of what to look for and what to ask when you want to explore therapy, right? So it's a little
Yeah.
bit of everything,
Yeah. Like,
but I
how do you
think,
know what questions should you ask to have an idea if your counselor?
yeah,
I
yeah.
had that once when I was like, "Do you know about eating issues?" And she said, "Oh yeah, da 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 da." But then when I was in session with her, it was like, well, she doesn't really know.
Mhm.
I mean, she knows theoretical stuff about eating issues, but she couldn't really help me with what I was trying to get help with.
Yeah,
So, what
right.
kind of questions should you ask from a counselor or a therapist or psychologist?
Yeah, just those sort of things, and then giving you a bit of a path to know, like, what are some of the like therapeutic modalities that maybe would be really helpful for your therapist to use so that you can kind of work through this phase of life that you're going through. Because I want to really emphasize the fact that it puts a lot of pressure on your sense of self and your self identity, because we know
Hmm.
that there's so much biologically occurring, which shifts so much about our brain body connection, and feeling super disjointed with regards to, say, our relationships and who we are in relation to our roles that we carry in our life at this point of this transition in our life. So that if there's a lot that we're going to cover, but I really want to normalize and then also kind of give a bit of some path for women that are in that contemplation stage of like, I think I should talk to someone. Um, but how do I go about it? Or what should I be looking for? Because it's a journey to find the right therapist.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing is, how do I know it's bad enough? And I will always say, well, you're asking me. So I would say it's probably already bad enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, before we begin, I think that's just a really valid point to make, because I think some women are like, well, maybe it's not this. Maybe
Mhm.
it's because we're all going through different life circumstances or
Yeah.
adversities in our life, even in our 40s and 50s, right? 60s. So it's really important to recognize that sometimes we just mesh it all together. and we're trying to figure out like what at what point do I go and seek out that support, right? So a lot of women that I work with, they're usually coming for other reasons, but then we get to some of the other parts of why they're actually there. And typically what we see is that they're going through this very significant life transition, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
journey in a lot of shifts, again, biologically, hormonally, and which affects, again, our mental health, our cognitive health, right? Our overall well being. And that's why, like, it's really important that we're looking at from more of a holistic kind of perspective today.
Yeah. Yeah. And that floats my boat. I think that that's one of the things that is kind of flawed about the medical system in that,
Mm,
you look at my, whatever. For me, it was a sense of overwhelm and sudden anxiety. And I was really lucky that I had a doctor that believed me and listened to me and thought that it was perimenopause. But that's not the standard case that you're believed right away and that it could happen like just like that. It seemed like one day I woke up and I was just suddenly overwhelmed. And she said, "Oh, I know, I hear that all the time." So
mhm,
I wish that everybody, I wish that everybody had invested in coming to this and hearing about the mental health side of it. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I'm just going to open the chat and say hello just so that it pops up because we have people and then they can say, if you have a question, Jane is happy to answer. And if
mhm,
you put it into the chat, I will find a way to kind of bring it to her attention, either ask the question for you or have her look at the chat and address that. So there's no such thing as stupid questions. All questions are valid and important. And we want to hear from you if you have them. And then if nobody asks questions, I will ask questions that we hear all the time in the group and, get as much bang for our buck as we can, basically. So let's see what you got. I'm really interested to see. I love the first slide. I saw that you've got quite a bit of variety of different ladies, which I love.
yep. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Yeah. So again, this talk really is just helping you understand the mental health components because, to your point, Jessica, it's like it's sometimes it just happens overnight, right? And then you're just confused and overwhelmed, and you're not too sure what it is, and you're trying to pinpoint it. And I really want to offer a bit more insight for women that are going to be viewing this or being participating tonight to feel supported, especially because it's such a significant life transition that unless you are part of a group like this, no one's really talking about it. So I really just want to address some of the mental health challenges, like ways to cope. And then at the end of the day, continuing to build that strong support network from a holistic perspective. Um, I'll probably just move on from this side because you introduced me, but just a little bit more about myself. I've been in practice for almost 20 years now, but this latter part of my career, I've tended to gravitate to work more with women, as I said, that are typically coming in for a variety of different reasons. But we tend to then start to narrow down on the fact that they are going through the natural stages of perimenopause, menopause, and then allowing them to help them process what they're going through, finding a safe space where we can normalize it. And then, I do a lot of system navigation for my clients to know kind of who else do we need to pull in their circle of care, especially if they feel like, as you said, the medical system is kind of letting them down and making them feel um, like what they're talking about isn't real or isn't relevant to why they're coming in to see their doctor, for example, or undermining kind of what they need, and or just saying, I'll just do some blood work and then just kind of leave it at that, right? um,
Yeah, and we have our participant already saying this is what happened to me overnight. So it really is this like one day I was normal and then all of a sudden I was overwhelmed and anxious.
Yeah, and it just causes such a significant shift in your equilibrium, especially if you're like, hey, at this point, right? We likely feel a bit more like grounded in like who we are, what we're doing in our career, maybe in our relationship, in our families. there's some accomplishment maybe that we've gone through in our life so far, and we're kind of looking into a different, you know, existential kind of sense of self, right? And that's a lot of work that I do more with the women I work with from more of a kind of a psychodynamic perspective of that sense of self work. So it just feels like the carpet's being pulled under you, and you're just like trying to just get through day by day, trying to figure out like what am I actually going through. And it's a very lonely place, right? Especially if you don't feel like you have a very strong support system to help to kind of wrap around you. Um, but I thought I would start with something funny because I feel like this is something that comes up a lot. And even in my personal life, when I'm talking to friends and family that are going through, perimenopause or menopause. And that, when we talk about and we're coming together in this common space of like that, what we're going through, I think a lot of us are like, I have acne now, or I have hair growing where I never had, or I'm sweating, or I'm itchy, or all of these things, or I smell, right? All these biological shifts, like we talk about, like it feels like I'm going through puberty all over again, right? Like I feel like I'm a teenager all over again with the high highs and the low lows and like the shifts in mood. And then again, these biological shifts as well. So I like to talk about how when we go through the perimenopause, menopause kind of shift, right? It does feel like a midlife puberty essentially. So tonight, I just wanted to again increase awareness and reduce the stigma, right? And really, I find like when I bring a little bit of humor, right, into the work I do, like I feel like it just allows women to relax a little bit more and feel like they can show up in a safe space and just like talk about some of the wild experiences that they go through, right, on a day to day, like physiological shift, but also just more of the. I had a woman the other day where they had, I guess, a panic attack right in the middle of Costco. And they were like, this has never happened to me. So, how do you kind of work through those experiences, but bring a little bit of normalness to kind of what we go through? So, I wanted to just really start off to help kind of validate some of the common symptoms that we see more from the mental health challenges. And these are just very common experiences that we will go through. But I really wanted to highlight the fact that what we tend to obviously see are more of the psychological symptoms that are like mood swings, again, irritability, a fluctuation in hormone levels can result in change in mood. Again, that can be irritable, feeling on edge, a heightened emotional sensitivity. And these mood shifts may happen that are very unpredictable, or kind of, I would say, a lot of women I talk to just they feel it's out of character of them. And we know that at the end of the day, that really impacts your day to day life, like your daily functioning, and a big piece. And for those that are here tonight, or even for those that are going to be watching later, it really does also affect relationships, right? Because you are feeling this kind of out of body experience or feeling a disconnect from who you actually are and not feeling like you're in control of your mood, and your ability to kind of feel grounded. So I tend to really focus on, the anger and the irritability because I think a lot of women talk about that. Like, that's just not me, right? I've never been someone that just kind of 0 to 100 kind of feel like they flip. It's like a light switch, and things that normally wouldn't really bother them, or it would just kind of roll off their shoulders, or they'd be kind of flexible with, just just kind of chipped away at them, right? Or just really kind of brought on this physical kind of sensation of like anger, where they felt like this intense like tension in their bodies, which kind of was the output of it was that irritability. Um, I do
I just
find,
wanted to pop in and say,
yeah.
I experienced that myself, and I'm, we don't know each other really, really well, but I'm gentle and kind and loving, and I mean, I really want to have a good time. And
Mhm.
so this whole getting suddenly really angry was very out of character for me, and I felt I
Mhm.
had a bit of an identity crisis. Like, who
Yeah.
am I that I'm, snapping at my husband or really angry about things that I would normally just find, I had
Yeah.
one woman get angry at me because I told her she really needs to come tonight.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
shoot. But it has passed. Like I still do get angry like a normal human being now.
Mhm.
Just to
Yeah.
let
And
people
again
know.
and again, I think it's really important to know that, like, feeling angry is normal. That emotion, obviously, I always say it always gets a bad rap. But in the therapy sessions that I support women in, we talk about just the normalization of, like, what's actually kind of rooted, because usually the anger and the irritability is a sign of maybe the hormone changes, or your nervous system is dysregulated because of maybe the fluctuating hormone levels, right? And that sends like these, it's a shift in your equilibrium in your brain chemistry, essentially. So naturally, that it's kind of like your brain is a computer, and when it feels like it's off kilter, right, naturally what our response is that our brain perceives that as like a threat to its system, and as what we do is we expel that through anxiety and depression and irritability. um, and I really wanted to highlight this piece tonight, is that women that I work with, they talk about, like, all of a sudden they just feel like down and out, right? So I really wanted to talk about that piece, is that obviously in the medical field, we tend to pathologize everything, right? That's what they're meant to do. And so when we think about depression, um, we think about like a clinical way of looking at depression, right? But I really wanted to emphasize, when I look at depression and when I do an assessment with a woman in my therapy sessions, we do talk about the fact that, like, it's just more of this like numbness and this like kind of the sadness, but it's very different. And the sadness is more kind of, to your point, just kind of like, just like this disconnect in who you really are, right? It's kind of like an identity crisis. But I think the more pieces that I tend to look at when I look at depression as a symptom, is that for kind of a shift in, I think a lot of women talk about, is that they have this lack of interest in activities, of things that they naturally like loved, that was their outlet. If it was reading, like hiking, being part of a book club, going out for maybe coffee with their girlfriend, going out to do some, like, a little bit of self-care, right, for themselves, going for walks, anything that tended to, or exercising tended to be something that was their outlet, right, their hobby, that there's just not that instinctual, like, internal kind of motivator to engage in those activities, right? Where you kind of feel shut down or numb or disconnected or just kind of sluggish, right? Like, I just don't have the energy or the intrinsic motivator to kind of push myself to do the things that I love. And then that feels like, kind of think about it as like a little bit of a baby grief and loss, right? Like, you feel that disconnect from who you are as a person, your personality, who you are as a person, and then feeling kind of checked out from your life, right? And the things that you enjoy. And that also couples with what I tend to see that are kind of the umbrella of depression, is that fatigue, that the challenges with concentration, right? So I just feel like a lot of when we talk about, you just feel like you're in this tornado or this silo and you just can't pull yourself out of it. Or I tend to talk about, like, you just feel like you're in this pit of despair, right? And you feel like all you're getting is people throwing you shovels and you're just digging deeper and deeper, right? But really, what you need is a rope. And that's where someone like myself comes in to kind of help kind of dismantle and demystify what you're experiencing, and then kind of normalizing and sharing information so you feel a bit more empowered and you feel like you're in a bit more in control of what is actually going on. I also wanted to highlight the anxiety parts, right? A lot of women talk about like out of nowhere, they just feel nervous or worried or restless. And these are all common symptoms that I see. And the anxiety may be related to life changes, health concerns, or the hormone influences, right? And this can be very, very overwhelming, especially if you don't know how to address them or you don't know who to support you with these challenges, right? So I know that a lot of a topic that tends to come up is that weight gain and the weight loss, or the challenges with weight loss, and the the plummeting self confidence and self esteem. And I know we were just talking, Jessica, about the fact that a lot of women feel like, they talk about like, I'm doing all the right things that are supposed to help me kind of work through the hormone changes, and nothing feels like they're working. And then that makes us feel like worried, right? Or nervous about maybe underlying health concerns, or why is this not working out for me, right? So it's just this like kind of cycle of these negative thoughts that you have about yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I just want to jump in and say I see that a
yeah.
lot where it's like that you're just doing such a great job of explaining it, Jane. Like it's such a
Mhm.
good explanation of exactly what it feels like.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up with someone recently was, well, I'm not really depressed because I think when we think of depression, we're thinking of like the really like the serious can't get out of bed, not bathing kind of depression.
Yeah.
Where low mood is more like not wanting to knit when you've always been someone who likes to knit, or not wanting to read anymore. And then that can end up being like, well, who am I? And now I'm angry because I'm not doing, or I'm doing all the right things and it's not working. And so now I'm having more anxiety, or the anxiety for a person who's never had anxiety before. I
Yes.
kind of felt lucky that I knew what it was.
Yeah.
Because if I hadn't, I really might have thought that I was dying. And so, yeah, keep going. We're
Yeah.
all
And I
ears.
think I think that's the other piece is like, again, if this is something that is new for you, or you already kind of experienced it, but it just feels like the severity and the frequency has like increased, right? It really stops you in your tracks. And I think even to the piece around the depression and the anxiety, like the depression piece, right? Like to your point of like, we tend to just look at it as like a textbook. And I think for a lot of women, they just feel, like I said, that numbness or that checkout. Like, especially for women I work with that are like, they're like, I loved connection. I'm a connection person. I like to be social. I like to go out with girlfriends for dinner or my partner and do things, or like have that social connection time outside of work on the weekends, right? And they tend to notice that shift of like, I don't really want to be around people. I have a lot of anxiety about kind of socializing now. And the idea of like mustering the energy to, be in these social situations is very overwhelming, right? Especially if you're noticing more physiological shifts in yourself, like again, weight gain, um, bloating, hot flashes, and then again, difficulties with sleep. I think the other thing too, again, when we notice like the reduced like libido and the vaginal dryness, right? That shifts our desire to be intimate with our partner, which then affects our connection with them. And then again, what builds on that and then just pummels you with all of that is there's a communication breakdown in your relationship with your partner. So, and then at the end of the day, you feel like empty and you feel like I am the problem, right? So, I really wanted to highlight some of these symptoms before we kind of get deeper, because I really wanted to highlight a few more pieces that I see tends to come up a lot for women that we work with. So, as I said, I really wanted to emphasize that this experience that we go through is so unpredictable, right? And there's no like playbook. There is nothing to say by this age and this timeline, this is what you're going to experience, and then it's going to end at this time. right? If we graft it, it just there's ebbs and flows, right? But I think what I really wanted to highlight is just when we're dealing with the physical symptoms, right? Classic ones are the hot flashes and the sleep disturbances and the fatigue, the bloating, the weight gain. I think also a lot of women talk about just like some changes in their body as far as like pain, like in joint pain and other body pain. This will contribute to our mood changes, right? And as I said, there's this frequency of mood changes with the irritability and the anxiety that might feel very unpredictable, especially when there's these significant hormone fluctuations, right? That if you're someone that is still trying to work through it and find your right kind of, you know, kind of plan essentially, it feels very out of control. And what I tend to see a lot of is that really, really shifts our sense of self. So I see a lot of women that I work with, they just feel like this impact in their self esteem, and just feeling a sense of vulnerability, right, through all of this, where they don't really know who they are through this. They feel very out of control. They feel like people in their life, like maybe their partner or family members or their support system, don't quite understand what they're going through. Right. And it's hard to articulate it. And then again, when you put yourself in seeking out medical support, you're kind of a door is kind of slammed in your face, essentially, especially if you've had a doctor kind of undermine you or just kind of brush you off during a doctor's visit. So I've had another woman just recently I was working with that they went to talk to their doctor about just the sleep disturbances and the night sweats. And they just really brushed them off, like just kind of like, oh, that's normal. And didn't really give them any sort of validation or like next steps on how to manage it. Like just basically like, yep, that happens. It's gonna pass, right? So it's a very difficult thing, right? And then when you couple all the physiological changes on top of the mood changes, and then some of the other kind of symptoms like depression, anxiety, we see that shift in family dynamics, right? Such as maybe other things that are going on, maybe in your relationship, maybe you're someone that children are leaving the home, right? Or you're caring for aging parents, could add another emotional like level of strain in your life on top of everything that you're going through physiologically, cognitively, and mentally. I also love to nerd out a lot with my clients and helping them understand too just the shifts in your brain, right? So I do a lot of work around understanding our nervous system. So that is more polyvagal theory work. So helping women understand like there's big shifts that are happening with your neurotransmitters and the neurotransmitter activities in your brain. And that influences emotional and mood regulation, which puts you at a higher risk for depression, anxiety. So I want to talk about that too, is that when you're going through these physical and emotional shifts, right, on top of, like I said, these other social factors like changes in your family or changes in, your relationships, you're at a greater risk of having mental health concerns that come up, right? And we do need to address them, right? We need to kind of look at what are the symptoms that I'm going through, and we want to normalize it that we're all going through this, right? That you're not alone. And it's important to, seek out support. And my hope is that we talk about like kind of what path to kind of go down when you are going through this and who to kind of reach out to and what support would be really helpful. As I said, when we have these hormone changes, we will notice a shift in our feelings and our reactions. So if we're someone that, tended to not feel comfortable with emotions, or just tried to kind of push things down or avoid as a coping mechanism, um, or just kind of brushed off, kind of, or acknowledged our emotional response, it really throws you off because you can't really avoid it during this transition. And a lot of the women I work with, that what we do is get to some basics, right? Of really understanding the shifts in the feelings that they're experiencing and normalizing them. So, for example, when you feel that sense of despair or hopelessness, or, just that sadness, or just, I feel sad, but I don't know why, or I feel sad, but there's nothing really to the causation of the way I'm feeling, right? That feels very disjointing for us because we're always looking for the why, right? Why is this happening? Like, you know, I have a roof over my head, I have all my basic needs met, I'm in a relationship, I have all these things going for me, but I'm still feeling really down, right? Or I don't feel this sense of like, contentment or joy, or kind of overall like happiness. So we try to unpack that, right? To normalize the mood swings and the emotional fluctuation. Because again, there is these mood variations, right? And it makes it more challenging for us to, continue to engage in our routines, our tasks, our responsibilities, right? So if you're working and still managing your home and parenting or caring for aging parents, right? That's a lot that you're juggling, while, like, if it, having these huge shifts in your mood, right? That's a lot of balls that you're juggling while really struggling internally. Um, so it's, at the end of the day, that really puts a strain on your sense of self. It puts a lot of pressure on you, especially if you're juggling all these different roles while struggling emotionally. And we see that affecting your daily functioning, and more importantly, it strains personal relationships as well. But at the end of the day, I really want to emphasize and normalize this piece, is that during this transition, we are more at a higher risk to experience anxiety and depression because we are having a hormone imbalance. And you add in more some other psychosocial factors, right? As I mentioned earlier, with regard to maybe changes in relationships, changes in family dynamics, maybe changes in your career. And so it's really essential that we are being proactive with the mental health care. I think I wanted to recognize is that because we have these like outwardly like biological changes that are happening, we see and we feel the physiological changes that we experience, we tend to focus on that. But that's also because we live in a world that's very focused on Western medicine, that focuses on addressing the physical ailments rather than helping to nourish our brains, right? And someone like myself that's a mental health professional, that is a therapist, I'm in the work of healing brains essentially. So I really need to emphasize the fact that we also need to look at, that's why I'm very holistic in the work that I do, is that we also need to look at some of the mental health, the psychological and cognitive effects that we go through, right? On top of also addressing the physiological changes that we go through.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in and say, like, I see this a lot with women that have good, strong relationships with partners, and then they go to their partner while they're going through this and try to explain what's going on and get somewhat bad advice because the guy just, or, their partner's not going through it or hasn't gone through it and doesn't understand what's happening. And
Yeah.
then kind of goes to that old model of like, just power through, or if your friend's
Yeah.
bothering you, just get rid of her. And it's like, but maybe you're oversensitive about something that day, and in a
Yep.
few days you'll feel differently. So
Yeah.
knowing
Yeah.
who to ask, right? Knowing who to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the fact that like sometimes our partners just feel a bit hopeless too, of like, I don't know what to say. So I'm just going to throw something out into the wind. Right. Or, especially as we talked about, like if the way that you are experiencing things and it's so out of character for you, it's also very out of, it probably feels very uncomfortable and out of character for your partner. So they're probably feeling that sense of hopelessness or like, I don't know what to do. Like, I just don't know. So I'm feeling a bit kind of lost through this experience. Or again, maybe your partner is not going through this to your point and they don't know how to help. So they're just kind of throwing anything out there. Right. So I think it's really important that we really look at being a bit more proactive when we're looking at our mental health through this transition. Um, the other piece that I want to emphasize is that when we look at mental health, we also have to look at the cognitive changes. And I've always say with all the work that I do is that sleep's paramount. And so when we experience this, we know that a side effect is that sleep disturbances. We have sleep issues. So many women we know have challenges with memory and concentration, which obviously affects our ability to complete tasks, to stay on task, the sequencing of tasks, and also retain that information. So if you're someone that, tended to just do multitask and be able to be on top of things and was able to accomplish all the things on your to do in one day, or was able to retain information and have good memory recall, and all of a sudden you feel like something has shifted overnight. That's very disarming. It's very debilitating, especially if you're reporting issues with memory, concentration. And then on top of it, you are noticing disruptions in your sleep patterns, right? Which impacts our overall mental health and our mental well being, right? If we, are never really saw sleep challenges, right? And all of a sudden, like it's maybe hard to fall asleep, or you get to sleep and then a couple hours into sleep, you're up like every hour until the next day starts. And then now you're chasing the day, right? Or wake up at certain times of the night, or you have had sleep and then all of a sudden at like 3 o'clock you're up and you cannot go back to sleep. So there's so many different variations of patterns that I see for what women express to me, but it's very debilitating. And then again, like I said, you're just like chasing the day, right? Or you just feel like you wake up and you're just so sluggish and it's hard to get the engines revving, which then again, what we see is that then just keeps it cyclical patterns of like heightened anxiety or just feeling kind of really down or like checked out, which again affects your motivation. It affects your ability to feel connected with others and relationships, communicating your needs, and also just that, internal intrinsic motivator to engage in things that you're interested in, or like showing up and doing your like a caliber of work at your job that you're used to. So I really wanted to normalize that experience, because a lot of women talk about just the level of loneliness of and like feeling very lost, about when it comes to those sleep changes as well. And so it's really important to kind of seek out that support, to find the professionals that focus on women's health, and hormones and hormone, someone like, there's so many different professionals out there, but someone that specializes in kind of like improving sleep is really, really important, because the sleep is a catalyst to our mental well-being.
Oh, yeah, and I have a sleep program that was the first class that I designed for
Yeah.
us specifically, and it does work. I have a
Yeah.
funny story about that because my filing system is very haphazard, but I could always find everything at the drop of a hat. And my
Yeah.
husband, it would drive him nuts because he'd be like, I can't find the whatever it is statement. And then I would just go get it. And then all of a sudden, about 5 years ago, I also couldn't find the statements. But just
Yeah.
mentioning that mostly so just to say it has come around. And now most of the time I can find what I'm looking for again.
Yeah.
But it's scary to go through that and not be able to be your normal high functioning self.
Yeah. Especially again, like to that point of like if you were very high functioning and prided yourself in being organized and that memory recall and being very good about sequencing of tasks, it's very disjointing and very debilitating, right? And you feel like you're in caught in this tornado or just like down this like tunnel and there's no light at the end, right? But there is, and that's my kind of shift of sometimes we have to look at like what are the is there some lifestyle changes that I have to make or is there some self-care practices that I have to engage in. And so this piece is that when I work with women we talk about how do I break this down, how do I set realistic goals for myself to encourage more healthy lifestyle habits. And when I talk about self-care, I'm not talking about surface level mainstream self care. I'm talking about very foundational kind of, activities that support our overall well being. So it's really important that when I look at self care, I really focus on the wellness wheel. So we talk about physical, cognitive, mental health, and spiritual. And we have to look at what are all like small little intentional acts that I do for myself. So remember that self care is deeper, right? And it's really more about the soothing, the self soothing, the things that we know that are really going to support emotional balance. So I really emphasize, and there's so much evidence based research that we do need to do some sort of movement. And so, anybody that I work with, I always say like my job is also like even though I'm not licensed to prescribe, I'm prescribing movement, whatever that might look like, and it doesn't have to be this big grandiose plan of like I'm going to work out like 5 days a week. That's not what I'm talking about. Or I'm not asking you to go do this, you know, extraneous like workout class, like a hit class or anything extreme. But a regular exercise is really important because that actually naturally regulates our nervous system. So that could be walking in your neighborhood, going for hikes, stretching, doing yoga or even doing chair yoga. So, what I do for myself and what I encourage my clients to do is actually scheduling it into your calendar, like it is kind of an appointment for yourself. So, if you looked at my Outlook, you would see that I label like some of my self care that I have to do every single day. And I practice that and I preach it to my clients that you actually have to schedule it in like it is an appointment for yourself. Because there's probably more of a willingness to do it rather than be like, okay, I'm going to focus on some stress reduction strategies. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to journal. I'm going to go to a workout class, all these great things. But when push comes to shove and then you actually have to do it, we love to sabotage, right? We're quick just to be like, oh, just like I'll do it tomorrow, right? So
Oh
it's
yeah, and
really,
even like the family, you may have people living with you that you take care of, and they have no hesitation
yeah,
to pull you away from your workout or your reading or whatever it is you're doing for
yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. So even to that point of like, if you have people that are also relying on you, like you build it into maybe a family calendar, right? My partner knows exactly what I'm doing and it's reciprocal, right? He has his time, I have my time. But we come to a mutual agreement that these are things that I need to do for myself. But we do some regular physical activity. It doesn't have to be extreme, but even just walking, putting on a nice podcast or um, an audio book or some music, and walking around your neighborhood, and then looking at just that balancing of nutrition, um, looking at some resources to kind of see, like, what are some options that I can do, just even small shifts, to balance nutrition. And then my big thing is that stress management. So what do I have available to focus on balancing my mood? Is that learning more about breath work? Is that learning a bit more about maybe journaling or progressive muscle relaxation? YouTube is our a great resource to, you just type in, relaxation techniques or stress reduction techniques, and just taking that time to kind of pull things that you tend to gravitate to. That's been a great approach for a lot of my clients, is just figuring out what is, the strategies that work for them, because we're all unique, and we're not a one size fits all. So it's just a trial and error of figuring out what are the self-care practices that are really helpful for me. Every day we have to be intentional in our self-care, because we have to every day focus on that nervous system regulation, the emotional regulation, because that will allow us to prioritize and improve our sleep hygiene. So, looking at, in order to have some healthy sleep hygiene, I have to regulate my emotions. I have to kind of ground myself every day. I have to focus on relaxation techniques, because I have to manage that cortisol, that stress hormone, through my day, because if that is being flooded in my body all day, that's going to affect my sleep. And then you couple that with hormone imbalances, that is a perfect storm that's going to create that sleep disturbance. So that emotional balance, there's some really great self-care resources that are kind of available, even if you're more of a visual person, just to kind of give you some examples. And like picking, we love choice. So I would say where I've seen a lot of clients have great success is they give themselves like a menu, essentially, to pick from. And then they focus on what are some options that are more for physical activity, what are some options for the week that are going to help me focus on nutrition, and then what are some options to focus on some stress management for myself. And then I really want to emphasize the importance of reaching out for support, right? If we are experiencing any mental health symptoms, it's really important that we explore, options that we have to maybe work with a therapist or a counselor that, is there to provide tailored supports and interventions. So, um, you tend to see, I think we've talked about this, Jessica, is that I think a lot of women are like, they might connect with a therapist, but maybe they don't specialize in, perimenopause and menopause and hormone imbalances and just the kind of experiences that we go through. So it's really important that you find a therapist that kind of has some of that specialization, that is going to be able to tailor supports and interventions. But at the end of the day, I think we need to kind of focus on is working with someone that is allowing us to give us practical tools and strategies, especially when we are struggling with our mental health, because it allows us to have more of these tools, strategies to manage those emotional difficulties, and in the day help us build some long-term resiliency that we need to kind of get through this transition. What you tend to see with a lot of therapists is that they'll focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, so that's CBT. It is very effective because it helps you. This particular therapeutic modality focuses on changing our negative thought patterns to enhance emotional well-being, and allows us to have stronger coping strategies. However, CBT is not a one size fits all. I have women that I've worked with that CBT is really great for them. It's a very structured approach, and a lot of women get what they want from those strategies. However, there's other women that I work with that they do feel such a deep sense of loss about themselves and in relation to others in the world. So we have to go a little bit deeper. As we kind of round out today's talk, I just wanted to focus on two particular modalities that I tend to bring into therapy with the women I work with. So the first one is acceptance and commitment therapy. So that's ACT. And I tend to use this when I'm working with someone I've done an assessment. They have worked with their family doctor. They are going through the natural stages of perimenopause and menopause. Um, and I find that ACT is really great because the core principles of ACT encourages mindfulness awareness. So really building up your self-awareness about what is going on every day, and being more tuned and aware, because I think a lot of women talk about, I just feel so disconnected to myself. And they feel this out of body experience, and they have this like loss of self, and their body's changing, and they just feel like they can't get grounded. So ACT really focuses on that mindfulness awareness. And it also allows us through certain approaches and processing in sessions to focus on acceptance of difficult experiences. So not only are we going through physical changes and cognitive changes and also mental health changes, but as I said, there's social factors, as psychosocial factors that are happening. Like I said, there's maybe changes in relationships, changes in your career. There's family dynamics that are changing. As I said, maybe you have children that are moving out of your house, or maybe you are caring for aging parents. So it's really important that you look at that. The other thing that I love about ACT is that it really gets us back to basics. So what is your commitment to your value system? How do you reevaluate or do some value clarification? Because values, we all have values that governs our lives, and those help us perpetuate and move forward with the goals that we want to accomplish through this transition in our life. So ACT really gets back to some basics and in helping you understand what are my values, because they evolve as we grow and mature, and we naturally are going through a developmental leap through this stage in our life, and with that our values change. So definitely the benefits is that it helps us navigate the ups and downs of our emotions. It helps reduce the struggles with distressing symptoms, because it doesn't feel good when we just feel this perpetuating sense of sadness, or we're nervous and we're constantly worried and we're feeling like very out of control. And then at the end of the day, it promotes self-compassion. We tend to not extend the compassion. We're very good about extending compassion to others, but it's really hard to extend compassion to ourselves. So it allows us to understand self-compassion and what we need to do every day to give ourselves self-compassion, and allow us to have a bit more flexibility and acceptance of ourselves. At the end of the day, with even when we're going through discomfort, it always helps kind of regroup back to our value system. So some of the main key skills are mindfulness. Cognitive fusion is more about just flexible thinking of how we're thinking about ourselves. And then again, those value clarification exercises. And then the other one is internal family systems. That's IFS. And that again supports more of that perimenopause well-being. So basically, IFS therapy helps our mind kind of our perception about ourselves. So understanding, who we are and how we are made up is of different parts. Maybe there's a part of us that's very self-critical. Maybe there's a sort of us that's very protective. So I always talk about, with a lot of women I work with, I see resistance come up. So resistance to change. And then there's parts of us that might be in exile, like we feel kind of disconnected and alone. And so IFS therapy really focuses on fostering harmony among all of our parts and getting to the root of our true self, our real authentic self, and what that is, and uncovering that and rediscovering. So, if you imagine that you're going through this life transition through the perimenopause and menopause stage of life, your sense of self is changing, right? So internal family systems helps us kind of understand our identity, address inner parts that are driven maybe by anxiety or self-critic or that inner critic or shame during this life stage. It encourages, there's 8 C's, and two of the C's are curiosity and compassion. So how do I extend compassion and curiosity to those different parts of myself? How do I like learn to accept that, but learn to also let go of that part that maybe is not serving me anymore? And then lastly, it helps to support some integration and healing of accessing that true self. So I have a lot of women that I work with that we uncovered that the way that they were raised was to be a good girl. And what does that mean? Is that being a perfectionist or a people pleaser, only feeling a sense of um, groundedness by the validation of external sources, of other people saying that they did a good job? So relying on others to feel validated about themselves or diminishing their needs and wants because they had to meet other people's needs and wants. So we through this uncovering all these parts through this phase of their life, we uncover that good girl sense of self maybe is not serving them anymore. So it allows for greater emotional resilience and more of a self understanding of who you are while you're navigating these changes. And then again, I really wanted to emphasize this piece is that there still is a very big role when it comes to family, friends, in our community. So there's so much value I put with that social support, right? We cannot do this in isolation. The experiences that we have are not they're individualized, but you don't have to do this alone. So when I'm working with women in therapy, we talk a lot about the emotional support um, through maybe friends and family by building up their support system because that fosters that resiliency while reducing the isolation. Um, Connection, especially having this community connection with this group, helps reduce that loneliness and creates a sense of belonging and inclusiveness that, like, I am not alone in this experience. And I can lean on other women that are going through this or, having some sage of advice to I'm here, but you're in this kind of phase. And how do we share our experiences to normalize and to build up some advocacy of what we need and to hopefully maybe make changes even in the medical system of, women need to be heard, right? And instead of being invalidated. So there's a lot of value of social supports. But I really emphasize that with maybe family and friends, but also that community network that plays a vital role in emotional health during this transition. So it's really the big part is I think knowledge is power. I always say knowledge is power. So sharing information, sharing education, building people's awareness of the changes that we go through helps develop realistic expectations of like, this is what's happening to me. I feel that I have more knowledge. I'm feeling more empowered and I recognize the symptoms and then I can seek appropriate solutions, right? Because I have this network of support. So,
Yeah, I
kind
just
of,
wanted to hop in and say I see that all
yeah,
the time with the group, with the CPMS group,
yeah,
where someone will come in and be just like completely like flabbergasted, no idea what to do,
yeah,
lost in the forest, no clue. And then slowly but surely, I watch them evolve as they continue to post over months and years. And now, like, there's a couple of them I can think of who, when they first started, were like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with all this stuff. I'm not going to medical nothing. And
Yeah.
have now found, now they're talking from this place of, I'm feeling so much better, and I did
Mhm.
this and this and this, and you might want to look into this, and you could ask about that. And it's been just really amazing to see how community of women can really show up for each other.
Yeah.
And then, in our kind of culture of whatever path you choose is what's going to be right for you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of to round things out, I really hope that with combining more knowledge and understanding about mental health, really highlighting the importance of self-care and seeking out that professional mental health support and professional help, coupled with like that social support, is that it helps with this transition to build up more resilience and well-being. So at the end of the day, as I have talked about, like, and I hope people kind of picked up on, is that there's such an importance of that holistic support approach, to promote mental health awareness through this transition and to promote that well-being. So combining that knowledge, the self-care, the professional support on top of that social connection, my hope is that women navigating right this stage in life helps with greater resilience. But I would say leaning into being like with more proactive and compassion. I think at the end of the day kind of supports a more balanced experience during this life stage, right? Because you're not alone in it. A lot of women are going through the same thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing that you've been able to develop this platform and bringing more women, no matter geographically where they are, together, right? To feel like, they have a place, right? And they have support and they feel that connection. So, yeah, thank you for inviting me here.
Yay. I loved it. I loved it. I'm interested in the family systems. I don't know exactly how, I'm just curious, right? So I
Yeah.
did get the book and I started reading it, and then I had to return it to the library because I have this thing about I borrow it from the library before I buy it. Otherwise I
Yeah.
end up like with stacks and stacks of books. There's just books
Yeah.
everywhere. But it was one of the ones that I was wondering if it might be effective with perimenopause, and definitely. So that's really
Mhm.
fascinating and interesting. What kind of resources, and I should have asked you about this before, but I know I have used the Psychology Today website to find practitioners before,
Yeah.
and it's been good. I've always found people that were quite, like good resources, and most of them will do like a free 10-minute talk or something, so you make
Yeah.
sure that you like them.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it is important to like them. And um and then the other thing I wanted to say is, like, I hear this also, well, I can't just can't afford that investment, right? If it's $180 a
Yeah.
session, but there are other ways of getting
Oh, there's
counseling.
so many different ways. So
Yeah.
first and foremost, to your point, Jessica, is that a good practitioner should always offer a free consultation. If that's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I always tell clients it's a quick, like little like speed dating, right?
Yeah.
Just figure out if I'm the right fit for
Do
you.
I want to tell you about my weird period?
Yeah, and, like, again, the biggest so the I always tell clients, the biggest step forward is, taking the leap and being courageous and brave to want to seek out this support. That's the biggest step. But the other one is to ensure that therapeutic alliance and that therapeutic relationship. So you want someone that hears you, sees you, and you feel safe with, because there's a lot at play when it comes to this relationship, because there's a lot of use of self that's being brought into the session by your therapist, right? Where you feel like you're healing some attachment, you're doing some of this work, but you can come in and be like, this is what happened to me, or this is what I'm experiencing, and not feel a sense of judgment, that you can be vulnerable and then go back to your real world. So
Mm,
I would say, like, if there's anyone in this group that's looking for a therapist, the therapist should be offering a free consultation.
yeah.
Again, obviously, Psychology Today is great. There are other platforms. I know that private practice and paying for therapy can be quite expensive. So Ontario offers a structured psychotherapy service that is free. It's That's in Ontario, so I would probably have to look to see if there's same kind of program that's involved and offered in different parts of Canada. But in Ontario, there is the Ontario Structured Psychotherapy program. Obviously, any of your local Canadian mental health associations offer counseling. But there are some therapists that, and I would always ask my clients to ask, like, does that therapist offer a sliding scale?
Sliding scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most practices should be offering a sliding scale.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and you have to ask. That's one of the things that I say all the time to women, right? Because I think a lot of us are trying to be a good girl or we're trying to be a
Yeah,
good
but
girl.
again, ask. I don't think there's any harm. There should not be any fear of asking because essentially you're wanting to know more about a service. You would ask questions if you were seeking out other services. So a good therapist should be outlining who they are, how they practice, what they specialize, and if they offer a sliding scale. And most
Hmm.
therapists should be offering a sliding scale.
And I did have like a few times, to my surprise, a counselor is willing to work with me on a very low fee because I was so committed, right? I made my appointments and I walked out, I made another appointment, I never left it hanging and I was just very invested. And so for
Yes.
them, it was kind of like they were also invested, more than just, and there was some money exchanged, but just because I hear that so often, I can't afford the counseling to find that place inside of yourself where you keep asking
Yeah.
because someone like my doctor, when my father passed away, I was just devastated. He was my best friend and we had a so whatever relationship with music and all of that together, and so it was a huge loss. And there's a grief counseling program in Calgary that's totally free, 100% free.
Mm,
And yeah, how would I have known that if I hadn't told my doctor how, I wasn't just sad that my dad died. I was devastated and I needed
yeah.
help. So just keep asking. And sometimes I'll tell people like the lady at the pharmacist who's just bringing in your purchase, tell her that you need to,
Yeah.
because you don't know, the lady at Walmart might be like, "Oh, hey, you know what? I just found this." Seriously, it's talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say, like, the hope is that you have a family doctor who understands their role, right, to support you. And
Yeah.
I've seen family doctors that are really great, or they have a practice that they have a therapist associated with their
Yeah.
practice, right, or their family network of different doctors, and they have a social worker or a mental health professional
Yeah.
working out of their practice.
And
So,
it's free.
and
Yeah.
it's free,
Yeah.
right? Um,
So
but again,
don't give up. Keep asking for help.
yeah,
There is help out there. You can
yeah.
ask questions of Jane. And is there anything else we forgot to mention?
I think,
I think we covered everything. Like you
yeah,
did such a great job.
I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Awesome. So I really appreciate you coming and doing this. And that's a really good, I think, kickoff because as we said, so much emphasis on the physical symptoms, whereas the emotional symptoms are really possibly causing more problems in your work or your day-to-day life.
Yeah,
Then, especially if it's a cycle where it's up and down and you might feel pretty normal most of the time. But giving people that context and just did a great job. I just love it. It's so
yeah.
good. And I'll be in touch and we'll talk again soon. But I think we should hang up for now and then we'll just continue on. Tomorrow we're talking to an osteopath, so we're going to talk about body
I
work
think
and
that,
because it's a great thing. It's helped me a lot and I wish I could come see you. You're in Ontario, so you're only licensed in Ontario, right?
yeah, unfortunately. Well, we are looking to be licensed in Alberta and Manitoba.
Yeah, I'm in Alberta, so let me know.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
All
Take care.
right. Have a great
Okay.
night.
Bye bye.
Bye.